Something is happening in California's rental market right now that would have seemed almost unthinkable just a few years ago. In cities where landlords once had the upper hand, where apartments were rented sight unseen, and where renters were routinely outbid on listings by people willing to pay multiple months up front. In those same cities, landlords are now offering free rent, gift cards, and deep concessions just to fill their units. The balance of power has shifted. But whether that shift is good news and for whom is a much more nuanced conversation than most headlines are having. Before we go any further, this video is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing here is financial advice, legal counsel, or a recommendation of any kind. California's rental market is hyperlocal and changes constantly. Always consult qualified professionals before making any housing or financial decisions. Here is what we are actually seeing in California's rental market in 2026 and why it matters deeply, whether you rent, own, or are simply trying to understand where the state's housing story is heading next. Let's start with the data, because the data is genuinely surprising to many people. The most significant drops in rental prices in California were observed in Oakland and Sacramento, where rates fell by 9.1% and 8.1% respectively compared to the previous year. Other major cities also experienced declines, including Los Angeles down 5%, San Jose down 2.3%, San Francisco down 1.7%, San Diego down 1.3%, and Long Beach down 1.1%. Those are not trivial numbers. In a state where rents climbed aggressively for years, and where renters were widely described as among the most financially burdened in the country, seeing meaningful declines across this many major cities simultaneously is a genuine market event. Now, to understand why this is happening, you have to understand what caused rents to get so high in the first place, and what has changed. During the pandemic era, rents across California and much of the country surged dramatically. Prices for 1- and 2-bedroom rentals were rising at an annual pace above 12% in mid-2021 and mid-2022 amid high demand. That pace of growth was unsustainable. It was driven by a combination of historically low interest rates that made home buying briefly more accessible, but quickly reversed a wave of urban to suburban migration that compressed demand into specific corridors, and a multifamily construction pipeline that simply wasn't delivering enough units fast enough to absorb it all. Then the supply side shifted. In 2024, more than 600,000 new multifamily apartment units were completed nationwide, the most new supply in a single year since the 1980s. That is an extraordinary number. And while not all that supply landed in California, a meaningful portion of it did, particularly in Sacramento, the Inland Empire, and parts of Southern California. When new apartments arrive in large numbers and demand isn't growing fast enough to absorb them, vacancy rates climb, landlords compete harder for tenants, and concessions proliferate. Since early 2023, rent growth has turned negative as a surge of new apartment supply entered the market. And according to a luxury real estate broker at Douglas Elliman, barring a major economic shock, 2026 is shaping up to be one of the more renter-friendly periods we've seen in a decade. That last sentence is worth sitting with for a moment. One of the more renter-friendly periods in a decade. That framing is significant. It doesn't mean California has suddenly become affordable. It means that relative to where things were, the conditions for renters have improved in ways that weren't true even 18 months ago. Let's look at specific markets, because the story is very different depending on which part of California you're in. Sacramento is the most dramatic example of the rental shift. Sacramento wrapped up 2025 with rent growth turning negative for the first time on an annualized basis in the past decade. This is a city that was one of the hottest pandemic relocation destinations in the country. It absorbed a massive wave of Bay Area transplants. Prices ran up quickly, and developers responded by building. Now those new units are arriving at a market that has also seen some demand soften, and the result is landlords in many Sacramento submarkets who are offering concessions, free rent, gift cards, look-and lease specials, simply to maintain occupancy. Rent growth is not expected to rebound meaningfully through 2026, and concessions are likely to be widely employed. Los Angeles is a different kind of story. The rent decline in Los Angeles is being driven less by a construction wave and more by something more structural: population movement. Los Angeles County recorded the largest population drop of any region in the nation between July 2024 and July 2025, with roughly 54,000 residents leaving the county during that one-year period. The county's population dropped below 10 million for the first time since 2020. When that many people leave a city, it affects demand for apartments. Los Angeles multifamily rent growth has remained persistently low, with average year-over-year increases staying under 1% from 2023 to the present, including a decrease of 0.3% in 4- and 5-star properties. That means in LA's higher-end rental buildings specifically, tenants who negotiate well right now are in a position they haven't been in for years. Oakland has seen the sharpest drop among major California cities, more than 9% year-over-year. Oakland decline is tied to both the broader Bay Area dynamic and to its own specific challenges around public safety perception and economic uncertainty. When San Francisco's tech-driven demand softened after the initial wave of layoffs in 2022 and 2023, it rippled across the Bay. Average rent in the East Bay, currently just under $2,500 per month, is significantly lower than across the Bay in San Francisco and San Jose. That cost advantage relative to San Francisco has helped occupancy in some neighborhoods, but the overall trajectory in Oakland remains soft. San Diego and Anaheim represent an interesting counterpoint. Unlike Los Angeles and Sacramento, these markets are actually expected to see more supply coming online through 2026. Supply volumes in San Diego and Anaheim have been limited recently, but are expected to increase by more than 70% over the next 12 months. That additional supply, in markets that are already seeing rents soften, is likely to keep downward pressure on prices in those areas through at least the spring leasing season. And then there is San Francisco, which is its own universe. San Francisco remains the most expensive rental market in the state by a significant margin. San Francisco remains the most expensive rental market at around $3,724 for a one-bedroom apartment. It has seen modest declines, but the decline narrative in San Francisco is complicated by the AI industry's influence. Two Bay Area metros, San Francisco and San Jose, currently rank among the top spots for fastest rent growth, as the AI boom has created a wave of high-paying tech jobs there. So San Francisco is genuinely a split market. The ultra-high end of rental stock is under pressure, but tech-adjacent neighborhoods close to major employer campuses are seeing renewed demand that offsets some of the softening. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture, because the rent trends don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of a much larger story about California's affordability and what it's doing to the state's population. In 2025, California experienced a net loss of about 150,000 people. That is a significant number for a state of nearly 40 million residents. And according to a landmark study from UC Berkeley's California Policy Lab, the driving force is not primarily politics, weather, or crime. It is economics. Californians are leaving the state for more affordable communities and improving their financial position. On average, movers relocate to neighborhoods where monthly housing costs are $672 less, and after 7 years, they are 48% more likely to own a home. That last statistic is worth reading twice. People who leave California are nearly 50% more likely to own a home 7 years later than people who stayed. Not because they necessarily earn more money, but because the housing market in states like Nevada, Arizona, Texas, and Idaho allows their incomes to go meaningfully further. For renters who left California, rents in their new neighborhoods are about 30%, or roughly $631, lower. This population dynamic is one of the reasons California's rental market has softened. When people leave, they leave vacancies, and those vacancies concentrated in specific building types and specific neighborhoods create real leverage for renters who remain. The question is whether that leverage is enough to make California meaningfully more affordable, and the honest answer is that for most households, it isn't yet. According to California's Q4 2025 housing data, a household needs to earn at least $213,000 per year to afford the median price California home based on a 6.35% mortgage rate. With California's median household income around $80,000, the gap between earning and owning remains vast. And while renting is less extreme than owning in terms of monthly costs, 3 in 10 California renters still pay 50% or more of their income on housing, a rate that puts them in what housing economists call severe cost burden. The average rent for an apartment in California is currently around $2,628 per month, a 1.1% increase compared to the previous year. So while specific cities have seen sharp declines, the statewide average tells a more complicated story, one where some markets are genuinely getting softer, but the overall cost of renting in California remains significantly above what most households consider affordable. Rent in California is 32% higher than the national median. The cost of living in California extends well beyond rent, and that's a point worth making clearly. According to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, the cost of living in California is 12.6% higher than the national average. That gap shows up in utilities, car insurance, groceries, healthcare, and state income taxes in ways that compound the housing burden significantly. A renter who saves $200 a month on a new apartment deal in Los Angeles might simultaneously be paying $600 more per year in car insurance, more for health coverage, and significantly more in state income taxes than a peer earning the same salary in Nevada or Texas. The full cost picture matters enormously, and it's often the piece that gets lost in conversations focused exclusively on rent numbers. California in 2026 can still be worth it, but only if you treat the cost of living as a full system, not just a rent number. That is a genuinely useful way to think about it. People who move to California for career opportunities, cultural access, climate, and community often find real value that doesn't show up in a monthly budget spreadsheet. But people who are making a purely financial calculation, looking at rent relative to income and comparing it to other states, are often arriving at the conclusion that California doesn't pencil out for them anymore. For renters currently in California, the softening market creates real, actionable opportunities that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. Landlords in Sacramento, Oakland, Los Angeles, and San Diego are offering concessions. Now is a legitimate moment to negotiate, to ask for free rent on a new lease, to request a month-to-month option at a discount, to push back on renewal increases in ways that would have been dismissed out of hand in 2021. Concessions for renewals are almost unheard of in San Diego, but operators expect to use them to the spring 2026 leasing season. That is not a detail you would have heard a few years ago. At the same time, it's important to be honest about the trajectory. We are past the peak of that multifamily construction surge, with 2024 seeing over 600,000 new units, 2025 seeing fewer, and 2026 expected to bring even fewer still. As new supply slows and if demand stabilizes or recovers, some of the relief renters are currently experiencing could fade. The window of concession-friendly conditions is real, but it may not be permanent. And for people watching from outside California, whether you're considering moving in or whether you left and are weighing a return, the numbers suggest the calculation is still very much worth doing carefully. The rent declines are real, but they're coming down from levels that were already extreme. A 9% drop in Oakland still leaves Oakland significantly more expensive than most comparable American cities. A 5% drop in Los Angeles still leaves Los Angeles rents at levels that consume an unsustainable share of most household incomes. The California cost of living story in 2026 is neither the simple doom narrative of endless escalation, nor the cheerful relief story that some headlines want to tell. It is a market in genuine flux, responding to supply, responding to population shifts, responding to the accumulated weight of years when prices rose faster than most people's ability to absorb them. What's happening right now is real, and it matters. But understanding it requires looking at more than one number in 1 month. It requires the full picture. This is Discover USA Homes. If this breakdown was useful to you, share it with someone navigating the California rental market right now. Whether they're trying to negotiate a new lease, thinking about moving, or simply trying to understand what the headlines actually mean. Leave a comment with your city and what you're seeing on the ground. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of where this market is going. And as always, take care of yourselves.